Before me stood two separate doors entering into a mountain, much like entering a cave. And the perception that I had was that I had just left the wilderness after a considerable amount of time. The door on the left appeared in gold and jewels, was very fine looking, very appealing to the eyes. The door on the right was much more simple, made of wood, not really very elaborate. It was at this point that I discerned that the vision was like a salvation experience for most people. And so entering into the door on the left, as soon as you walk in, you see this beautiful table that has all of these desserts, only desserts on it, but all different kinds of ice cream, sweets, cakes, cookies. And as you look around the room, everything is it's just very well manicured. But the place is seemingly lifeless. Although there's a lot of people there, it just doesn't feel like there's life to it. As you continue past the table, then you see it's like a bowling alley, and the bowling pins are made of solid gold, and the bowling balls are made of, it looks like diamond. And it was at this point I really felt the impression of the Lord that this is like the world. And so it was the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And at this point, I had like some anxiety, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I began to try to get out, but there was no exits. And so I remember pulling up like the floorboards of the building, and ended up coming outside of the doors again. And it was at that point that I noticed that nothing was actually really gold. It was actually like foil almost. So it was like this false gold. So entering into the second door, the door that was much more simple, I had almost an immediate impression when I walked in that this was like religion or the church. And it entered into a cave that felt like there was more life in there, but it was dark. And as I walked in the cave, you could see all of these different people who had like buttons on their shirts, and they all had crosses on them that gave off light, but it wasn't really super bright. And they were a bunch of people chasing around, and there were different nuggets of like dim lit gems. And some people were digging them up, and then they would go and hide it somewhere else. And the other people were digging those gems up. And some people would dig up a gem, and they would just go around just sharing that one gem with everyone and everyone. It's at this point that Ben and Tim both walked out to me, and they were both wearing pins, but their pins were different. It had the symbol of a dove on it, and the light was much brighter, and on their heads it was like a headlamp. And turning off to one side of the room, you could see that there was a table, and on the table was just communion. It was bread and there was wine, and I believe it was Ben that grabbed the bread and Tim gave me the wine, and I took communion. And almost immediately it was like my eyes were opened to a different spiritual reality, and that all of the kind of the former ways of in the darkness and the gold were kind of clouded out of my mind, and I saw a door that I walked through. Once through this door, you see again this banqueting table, this beautiful banqueting table filled with all sorts of foods, but they were like good foods. So there were meats and nuts and cheeses, fruits and vegetables, and there was just a long table that was set. And I see Tim sitting down with his family and Ben sitting down with his family, and then my family and I began to sit sit down at places that were already set, the table that was already set. It was at this point that I looked off to the left, and you see the table extending out, but there weren't any more place settings. And then Tim walked over and looked at me, and he said, "Our obedience sets the table for those who will come later." And it was at that point that my family we had our food was set on our plates, but then we began to go to the next places seated beside us and began to set the table for the guests who would arrive. And at this point, the vision closed up. But I feel like one of the things that I had discerned was this is kind of the salvation experience of going through the world and going through religion and coming to the true place at God's table, but how our participation in that table was necessary for those who would come after us, and that is where it ended.